Hey there, ho ho ho, happy holidays, etc., and so forth. I have a holly jolly treat for you. You see, I entered 8 building competitions this year, 5 of them on the bakery server, 3 on Builder's Refuge, and I had a blast. I haven't really recorded anything, so to make up for that, I want to today show you all 8 of them. My goal for each of these competitions was to try something new each time, so that's going to be what I talk about mostly. However, I'm also going to illustrate the theme, and I'm going to tell you how long it took me, which almost always was the maximum amount of allotted time. This is the first bakery competition of the year. It happened in January. The theme was anti-gravity, and so I thought, hey, I'm going to build a science fiction... I'm going to build a science fiction classic. Rocket Ship Galileo. It's a 1947 novel by Robert A. Heinlein. Anyway, I based this particular version of the ship off of the cover of one of the covers of the book, and the challenge for me here, the new thing, was I wanted to see if I could shade chrome. I think I did an okay job. It's hard to shade chrome because it doesn't really have a color. So, of course, the difficult thing here was to make it not boring and white. Because I could have just made this all white, and I'm sure it would have passed as chrome if you knew the context. But I wanted to give it that extra pop. You might notice down here that it's got a detachable nose. That is not canon. The only reason it's detachable is because I couldn't fit the ship sideways within the space given by the plot. This one is 150 by 150, and then all the way to build limit. Here's a close-up of what the smoke rings look like. I used light blocks down here to kind of give the trail some life. However, I still think the whole thing works better when I have night vision enabled because the smoke doesn't turn all icky black when there is no light blocks. You can see I attempted to shade a little bit on the smoke too and give it some pink hue. Just to, give some color to the thing. It's all white and stuff. So I wanted to really add some more life. The back, though, is lacking in life because I ran out of time. I forgot to mention this was a 3-week competition, so of course this took me 3 weeks, and I just did not have the time, nor did I have the energy to shade the back like I did the front. One last thing I want to mention is that I shaped this whole thing by hand because I had not figured out how to use the Archeon Loft tool yet, so I'm quite proud of that, but I would never do it again. It took ages, but it was still reasonably fun. So as for ranking this ship, I did not get into the top 10 for the competition, so I don't have any points. However, I'm very proud that I got an honorable mention. This next build requires night vision because if I don't have night vision, it disappears. This was the second bakery competition. It also was set for 3 weeks. It happened in March, and like the first one, I was given a 150 by 150 plot to build in. And I think you can probably tell what the theme was. It's Western. Very broad theme, but a lot of potential. What is there to talk about? Oh yeah, I suppose I should mention what actually is going on. The idea was that this guy is terrorizing the West. He's a robot bandit, and he's so mean and angry all the time. And so he's just been taken down in a duel. You can see his V-twin engine, air-cooled V-twin, has been shot right through with a bullet. The new thing for this one was to shade my own shadows. So you can see I drew out his outline. You can see the oil gets darker. Where else? You can see that the undersides of his arms are darker, the underside of his cape is darker, his hat casts a shadow, that sort of thing. So the assumption is that it's high noon, the sun is beating straight down. That gave me the easiest time. There are a couple details that I want to focus on. One is the pistol. I'm very, very proud of that. Here's the other pistol. They are identical. I just rotated it. And, yeah, again, proud. I love the face. I don't think the golden tooth works quite as well as I hoped, but it's still there. And, of course, the highlight, which it also took me the longest, is the engine. It is quite messy, but also it's on an angle, and it's 2 other angles, so it took a little while. There was a lot of moving around of different versions of it. to get the shape right and to, carve it out in the way that made it look whole enough. Now, I think out of every competition entry here, that this is probably the weakest, or at least my least favorite. Namely because I think there's a lot lacking in the polishing department. For example, the arms, they're not super smooth. The shading is a little bit, you know. I said earlier it's supposed to be high noon to make things easier, but even then, there are quirks of sunlight that really don't show through here. And of course, the elephant in the room, the terrain. What was I doing? It's a cookie. I'll tell you what I was doing. I left it until the very last minute. I had 3 hours left on the clock, and my connection to the server decided to not work very well, and so I realistically had about an hour and a half to build this, and so this was the best I could come up with in terms of terrain. It is not great. This is just a bunch of fence gates. I think it kind of brings the quality of the build down, because you look at this thing and you're like, wow, so cool, and then you look at that, why is he standing on a cookie? And that sort of occupies your thought. Another thing that perhaps could have improved this build is to make it a little bit more dynamic, because it is a very still scene. He's just kind of standing there. It's a very easy pose to make a guy stand in, and there's not that much going on. It's supposed to be, a post-fight scene, but I think it could have used a little bit more. I'm not sure how that would have appeared, though. Maybe you have ideas you can put in the comments for me. This build took 3 weeks. I hope I mentioned that before. And I did not get top 10, but I'm still very proud of it. This next build is the third bakery competition. Like the previous two, I had a 150 by 150 area and 3 weeks to build it. I believe this took place in May. I'll correct myself on the screen if I'm wrong. Oh, and the theme was, I'm sure you may have guessed it, it's aquatic. So yeah, another pretty broad one. Anyway, I've tried several new things this time, but to see sort of the main one, I actually have to go and turn my brightness down to about 30 and then turn off night vision, because I actually tried to paint using shadows. You can see here the ice on the surface of the water actually casts a shadow on the bottom of the ocean floor. And I also used light blocks to kind of paint shadows on the sides of my rocks here. Here's what that light painting looks like, by the way. If you hold a light block, you can see where all the light blocks are placed. So I just used a sphere brush and painted around with light level 10. I believe it's light level 10 on the other side too. Yeah, you can definitely see where I just absolutely filled. So sorry for the eyes. I absolutely filled this area, and then I highlighted things with higher light levels that I wanted to be more visible. I think this build has a pretty significant flaw in that it struggles to come together as a cohesive whole. Yes, the theme is consistent, and yes, the building is consistent, but compositionally it is hard to know where to focus. And I think that has to do a lot with the fact that I spent 2 weeks on the terrain and the lighting of the terrain, and then spent like the last 5 days on every little bit. I think these fish I did within the last like 4 hours. So it really came together rather rapidly in the end, which prevented me from making a single focus that really stood out. My main goal for this build was to create something that felt authentically underwater, with all the lighting effects that you would see underwater, but without, the very opaque Minecraft water in the way of all of that. And that I think I succeeded at. I think that and the individual elements are the strong points of this build. So let's talk about some of the individual elements. I want to start with this guy up here. He's sort of the main motivation. Oh, I'm still holding light. He's sort of the whole motivation behind this scene, because my idea was that this is his creation. He's got these scissors here, and he's got this little toolbox all the way down here, full of bits of things that you can see represented by the rest of the build. So for example, there's chalk here, and then there's chalk writings on the walls. There's like empty thread spools here, and then there are a bunch of water bottles that are held up by thread. And so the goal was to make you assume that this little axolotl creature, axolotl mermaid hybrid thing, built all this by collecting junk. Junk like this little shampoo bottle here, or maybe this colander, or this pot, or this plate where these two mantis shrimp are having a boxing match above. You know, all these sorts of things that bring life and story and meaning to the build. Here inside of the garbage palace, we have a bunch of creatures, including these hermit crabs, and of course the king crab on top of a big pile of gold, because of course. Here's a ring, some very decorative teapots, and a watering can. I really wanted to make this area kind of feel like a bit of a hoard. So here's like another blinged out hermit crab that they're just kind of, you know, they've amassed quite a lot of wealth here. What else is there to show you? Oh yeah, I suppose I should mention the pot over here. These are supposed to be urchin skeletons that have been kind of hammed up to look like roofs, and then these are just shells or something. I know it looks like ice cream. I tried my best. Here, I actually built this part quite early on. It's supposed to be a paperweight. It's one of my favorite parts of this. You know those glass paperweights where they have flowers kind of inside? That's what this is supposed to be. The scene behind the palace is largely the same as the scene in front. I spent most of my time trying to block this off so I wouldn't have to build two sides of the structure. So that's why it's so crowded back here. The only real other notable thing is I've got my nice big crab fella here in its lair. And I wanted to represent something I found really cool about crabs, is that they are often not symmetrical. Their right claw is often a crushing claw, and the left claw is like a cutting claw. Same sort of thing for lobsters. As for the variety of things that I repeat around, there are 5 varieties of coral. There's this red stuff, this blue stuff, this purple stuff, this brain coral, and the orange stuff, all of which I based loosely around photos of real coral reefs. Finally, I am very proud of this seagull. His feet are way too big, but, you know, whatever. As for results, I don't really have any to report, because I also did not get top 10 for this build. This next build is my first entry on a Builder's Refuge competition. This was the July, I think, structures competition, where the theme was solitary. I love this theme. I think it's my favorite theme that I built with all year. And, yeah, like the other ones on the bakery, I had 3 weeks. Now, like Megray says in her video where she reviews this, it's not much to look at from the outside, and that's because I spent all of my time organizing what goes on the inside. I could give you a comprehensive tour of the interior and tell you all about it and spend hours and hours and hours talking about every single thing I did. However, I've been doing a lot of telling already, so I think this time I'm just going to show you. So here's the back of it, and I should probably give you some context now that you've seen the inside. It's supposed to be sort of like a cultural center, so it's got a theater, it's got a library, it's got an art gallery, that sort of thing. I originally wanted to also have an archive down in this section here, but just ran out of time. The other thing you also might notice is that the trees are incredibly basic. That's because I was told by the judges that trees and terrain and stuff like that, any plants or organics in that sense, would not be included in the criteria for judging. So the only thing that these trees do here is to lend a hand to the composition, which is being judged. Speaking of judging, I once again did not get into the top 10 best in show class. However, there were several subclasses, including survival friendly, best interior, best abstract, best realistic. What's the other one? Oh, best mega build. I think that's it. And I actually scored pretty highly in a couple of those. I got second place for the best realistic, and I got second place for best survival friendly, and I tied for fourth for the best interior. So survival friendly is probably the most confusing. That just means that any blocks you have cannot be debugged, and you cannot have anything that is illegal in survival. So, you know, no floating sand, no debugged blocks. Walls and signs and fences have to connect and have legal placements. But if you notice really quick, if you are a survival connoisseur, that this bamboo here is not survival friendly. I was given a pass for this by the judge's mercy. Normally bamboo this short can't be thick and can't have leaves on top. So yeah, I kind of forced this to grow and I didn't really think too hard about it. And while I'm here, here's a view that you wouldn't have seen from the inside that I spent a lot of time kind of getting the composition right on, and you can see a couple of mistakes. Anyway, I also wanted to point out some of my lighting techniques, a lot of which involved hidden torches. In this case, I hid the torches 2 blocks below the ground so that the flame particles wouldn't be visible from above. And these lights down here are supposed to be coming from these lanterns up here, which originally had an item frame in them, but when I exported the schematic, all the entities in the build were removed, which is why the tour took place in the actual competition world, where all the entities were retained. While I'm talking about mistakes I made, here's another one. Let me turn on night vision so you can see it better. This is not survival friendly. I just forgot that this was here. Another mercy from the judges. They didn't disqualify me for this. And I suppose I may as well show you the third major mistake I made, which is all the way inside here. This is what it looks like with night vision on. I was testing the seating positions and I placed the slab here, which made all of these signs illegal because there's nothing to support them. That's really strange. I came over here to show you the bell and it's gone. There, that's what it's supposed to look like. And there's supposed to be signs on either side. Oh. So the intent behind this is, of course, to have that soul torch behind the shulker box lighting up the area, and then the bell kind of representing the brightness of the lamp that shines onto the stage here. And in order to get the light onto the stage, I just had a torch behind on the trapdoor. Same with the other theater. To get the light on the stage, I put a torch behind the bamboo chair. Very basic stuff, but surprisingly effective. Finally, let me show you one more thing that I neglected to show you during the tour, and that is the bathrooms, because who wants an atmospheric tour of a bathroom? Yuck. There are 2 sets of these. They're both identical. There's one open stall. These stalls are empty because the doors and trapdoors made it so I couldn't really fill them with anything. And yeah, here's the sink. And the reason that there's 2 sets, because I made them mirrored so that the mirror would actually work. You can't really see it very well in the dark, but, you know, it's enough that it's there, in my opinion. The second set of bathrooms are over here, and they're exactly the same. Anyway, the overall goal for this build, my thing that I'd never tried before, has to do with lighting using natural Minecraft light. I wanted to avoid any sort of shader use or manual shading in this one. I really wanted to see how far I could push the vanilla Minecraft lighting engine, which is why there are holes in the ceiling right above where the windows are so that the light from the sky can actually reach down here. Normally this would just be pitch black because Minecraft lighting works in a purely vertical sense. At least the natural lighting does. So if you can't see the sky from where you are, you've got a shadow, even if it's a block right at height limit. It can sometimes be frustrating because of how simple it is, but that also means that it is incredibly easy to manipulate. So you can see here I've done more with the cauldrons here, and as well as over here with these carpets onto the trapdoors. I also took inspiration from quite a few real-life sources, including buildings that I have personally seen and been inside, as well as a lot of Frank Lloyd Wright architecture, especially with this amphitheater here. Final thoughts. I think I forgot to mention that we were given a 300 by 300 area to build. This was by far the largest area that I had access to this year. That's why it is so darn wide. And that's also why it is 1.5 scale, which is another new thing that I neglected to mention earlier. Every length in this build is 1.5 times the length relative to a player. So if a player is two blocks tall, a player in this universe would be 3. Overall, I think this is probably my favorite of my entries this year. I was super proud of it when I finished, and I was also super exhausted, which is why this next entry is so tiny. This was the 4th bakery competition of the year. The theme was ancient. Like the other 3, I was given a 150 by 150 area, and you can see that I did not fill it. I actually neglected to really do very much on this build until about a week left into the competition. This was a 3-week one once again, but because it happened immediately after the Builder's Refuge Structures competition, I was just absolutely disgusted with Minecraft for like a week after. So I didn't really do much for a little while except for build these trees, which luckily for me was my next focus. See, I don't really do terrain all that much. In fact, I almost never focus on it. It's mostly just a means to an end. So in this case, I thought, well, why don't I make that the center point? So I decided to make an old-growth forest to satisfy the ancient theme. This is supposed to be an old-growth temperate rainforest. The big tree here is supposed to be a coastal redwood, and then the smaller ones are supposed to be Douglas firs. And I looked up references, and I looked up sizes to make sure that they are all within scale to each other, and I also made sure that they were exactly player scale. So if I'm a regular person, this is my size compared to, you know, one of these trees. Old growth trees are huge. They are awesome. I love them, and I'm sad that I haven't gotten to build something like this before. I've just never really found the motivation. So really glad for this competition to kind of push me over the edge. Now, you might have noticed down below there are also some things, you know, and that's because I wanted to kind of double layer the theme a little bit, because I wasn't sure if just having this terrain up here was going to be enough. So I thought, well, why don't I do 2 sets of ancient? I'll do an ancient temple and then have an old growth rainforest on top of it to kind of accentuate how frickin' old the temple is. The temple is so old that it's got this thing growing on top of it. Crazy. Don't know how well that came across. That was my idea. And so this is why I've executed it as such. I did actually have some time left, and so I decided to build some organics. There's this little bear here and its cub, and then all the way up into the trees I built a couple of eagles. It turns out you could use the dragon head for a ton of applications. It's one of the only blocks that has a face that sticks beyond the 1 block cube that it occupies. The other one that I can think of right now being a banner. And so it's really useful for connecting things that normally can't really be connected, like these candles here. Here's another eagle in the tree tending to the the chicks. They're lit so you could see them at night. I know it's kind of morbid to have them on fire like that, but whatever. What else? Oh, yes. I also want to talk about the particles. You'll notice that there are a lot of particles around, and that's because I filled each of these trees with spore blossoms to kind of give the forest a little bit of, life. I also did something similar down here where I used spore blossoms in places as well as water on the level here so that the ceiling would drip. It's a very subtle effect, but I enjoy it a lot, and I think it was definitely worth the time it took to implement it. As for results, I once again did not get into the top 10. That is probably least surprising with this one, considering how small it is and how little narrative there is to it. So yeah, it's just a result of me not spending enough time on it, I guess. And also, the other entries were really, really good, so, there's that too. I'm not competing by myself here. Other people also make cool things. This next one is my first collaborative competition this year. I built it with my friend Whirdle for the 2-day Builder's Refuge hand-built competition, and the theme was Fortress. So the rules for the hand building was that we weren't allowed world edit, we weren't allowed Axiom, or any other tools that would allow us to, do massive changes. The only tool we were allowed was the replace brush in order to make debugging a little bit easier. And so, yeah, this took place at the beginning of August. It was very intense. It was extremely fun. Whirdle carried me. He built this whole terrain, this face and everything, and I organized the fortress above, and then Whirdle did a whole bunch of other texturing and detailing. He did all this grass inside here. It was really, really fun. It was great. I don't think we placed very high at all, but yeah, super fun. I'm so glad I participated in this. One particular thing that Whirdle did with the face down here that I think is really cool is he paid a lot of attention to value in the shading in order to make the face shape stand out. Value is essentially the relative lightness or darkness of a color. So in grayscale here, right, these dark blocks and these light blocks have different values and thus contrast, giving the effect of more depth than you would with just one flat color. Say if this whole thing were made of stone. Whirdle actually sent me a few pictures of iterations of this that I think demonstrate this effect pretty well. Another neat thing to note is the effect of turning off night vision. So I've turned it on to show you the value that Whirdle put into the face here, but if I turn it off again, you can see that the default Minecraft shadows actually accentuate this value difference even more. So the dark spots are now even darker, while the light spots remain roughly the same, giving the whole face a little more contrast and a little bit more simulated depth. There isn't really too much more to talk about with this build. It only took us 2 days and we didn't put too much thought into it. I suppose another neat thing you could point out is the amazing shaping Whirdle did on these flags. It's so cool to see, uses of blocks like this. This is not something that I typically would default to. So, there you get a teammate who can fill in the gaps and you can make something pretty cool. What else? Oh yeah, another thing I wanted to show you is, here's another use of dragon heads as cannons. I hope that's obvious. These are my creation. I suppose the new thing in this case was departing from the use of fancy building tools, which is not something I've really done in a long time. I mean, I've got that video from February this year, but that's pretty much it. And this is much bigger than the house I made then. So relying on just your hand building was definitely a shift that was harsher than I expected. I mean, with this sort of thing, you have to commit to ideas fully if you want to execute them. There's no really going back. There's no, removing a tower and replacing it with something else if you don't like it without, actually breaking and replacing that tower block by block. So it made planning a lot more difficult. And I think that's a good thing in this case. That was definitely the point of the challenge, and it was a really nice exercise in commitment. This next one also took place in August and on the Builder's Refuge server, and I collaborated this time with my friend WeepinqAngel. This was the 500 years later competition, and it was originally set to take 10 days, but it eventually was extended to take 2 weeks. And this is what we built. And I do have to first have a low brightness, which I already have, and I have to... come on, type it. Midnight. Set my time to midnight to really appreciate what this is supposed to be. And so Weeping and I paid very close attention to in-game lighting. And we wanted to create a build whose lighting kind of drives the story. And so that's why we have a big baby in a jar. This is also the first competition entry, I think the only competition entry that I can remember, that we actually gave a title. We called this one Rediscovery, and the idea was that somewhere in a deep underground lab that's been abandoned, little babies are grown in these units here. 500 years later, a robot comes and rediscovers humanity. And he's like, oh, what is this creature? And why do I feel affection, paternal affection towards it? You know, that's the idea. I didn't ask the judges how well this came across for them, but I'm hoping it did. What I do know is that the judges really liked the lighting, which we spent quite a lot of time debating how to do. And so most of the lighting is actually just kind of color on a gray body. So you can see here, WeepinqAngel actually built and colored this whole guy. I was mostly in charge of the container here. You can see that she's colored it so that the brightest possible blocks are facing towards the light source, while the dark gray blocks are away. And paired with light block placement, this gives the sense that the whole robot is glowing. And so by highlighting the highlights of the robot, you can tell which elements are, shiniest, which elements stick closest to the light source, which overall accentuates the shape of the scene. Now, before I turn the lights back on, I want to come in here and actually bring you in holding a light block so you can see the level of detail that we did to light this whole thing up. Because, like I mentioned earlier, it's not all color, some of it is actual light blocks. And so we were very careful to kind of match the level of light that we placed to the color of the block so that it would pop even more. And so as you get closer to the source of the light, which is supposed to be sort of this ring down here, that is then filtered through the orange goo inside the tube, things get dimmer and dimmer. And especially down here where the dust is, you can see that I've only done lighting on the edge of the dust that can actually see the glass. Now, I've done lighting down here as well, and that's because it actually changes the color of the blocks ever so slightly. It's very hard to notice. I'm not sure if YouTube will pick it up, but I'm extremely proud that I discovered this in this competition. It turns the block an ever so slight shade warmer. You can see it back here as well, possibly. I have a gradient from black stone to black terracotta, and I used light blocks to kind of smooth that out. It's a very slight effect. I'm not sure, actually I'm certain the judges did not notice because I asked one of them. But that's just one of the things that we kind of spent a ton of time on. This whole build is very specifically designed. Before I move on, I want to showcase a couple small details, including this switch panel with the Ender Dragon head switches and the light up buttons with the shading around them. I don't think this shading was as successful as this shading down here. I think being on the darker surface gives us a little bit more opportunity to make the contrast that makes it look like an actual light has turned on. Same effect for the power supply back here with the blue light and the red blinking lights there. And we also did a similar effect for the screen here to kind of give it that blue hue. Notice that the actual blue color of the screen is very kind of distilled. You don't really see very much of it. But because we have that accent there, you get the impression that the light is a lot bluer than, Minecraft can generate. And we got 6th place. It's not winning, but considering the people we were competing against, Weeping and I are extremely stoked. My final competition entry this year was also the last bakery competition, aside from the final, which we'll get to, I guess, I didn't make it. It's happening right now as I'm recording this. And the like the other bakery competitions, 150 by 150 block area and 3 weeks to build. And the theme this time is a little bit hard to tell just by looking at the build from the outside. However, if you just take a look on the inside, you might be able to get a better idea of what the theme is. It was mechanical. That's the theme. And yeah. For mechanical, I thought, well, I'll just build a power plant. So I did. And there wasn't really a particular challenge with this particular build. I think more or less it is an amalgamation of all of the stuff I learned this year in a way. I mean, I can't really, apply specifics, but this was the most comfortable build I did. This was most in my comfort zone. It also isn't complete. I wanted to have an element of liveliness into it to kind of increase the interest. I wanted to have creatures living inside and operating the power plant. Not that, hydroelectric power plants aren't cool. Aside from the devastating environmental impact, I think they are cool as hell. I mean, I based this one off of one that I visited in real life, as well as Hoover Dam, specifically for these turbines here. But it's still missing, the sense of focus. It's just a building in this case, and there lacks any particular story that really drives it forward. Now, I am incredibly happy to say that aside from this one bathroom area here, the entire build has a complete interior. So bear with me while I show you some of my favorite items. Starting with this crane. You can see I actually deliberately included this gap here to kind of separate the bracing from the actual track that this is supposed to run on. So this is supposed to be a hook here. I don't know if that comes across particularly well, but this thing runs on a track and can be used to pick up parts of these turbines when they need maintenance. Down here is a little bit hard to see. I think given the opportunity to design this again, I would have made these turbines more central to the room and increased the space down here so you could actually see the tubes that go into them. But yeah, this is where the water comes in from the dam and spins the propeller or impeller, I don't know the word, down here to make the turbine go. And there's 3 of them, and I've made little signs so you don't bump your head. I kind of slacked on the detail down here because I knew people weren't going to really look too hard. So it's mostly just lockers along the way. And then there's a small control panel on the other end here that, I don't know. I don't really know what it does. I didn't research dam components too heavily, or power plant components too heavily, so I don't, function is limited to what I think looks like function. And the same thing can be said for this corridor up here, which really doesn't serve much of a purpose at all. It just kind of links these terminals on the outside to, I guess, down below? I don't really know. Things don't line up too perfectly, but I'm counting on, the illusion of the fact that it's separated by a whole set of doors to give the impression that everything is connected kind of in these pairs of 3s. Next up, I really want to talk about the workshop. This is supposed to be a lathe, this is supposed to be a drill press, this is supposed to be a welder, and these are supposed to be tanks for gas for the welder. And then this, I hope is obvious. It's a forklift. I spent way too long on it, and I love it. It was particularly challenging, I think, to get into this scale, because it had to be a 2-block center, which meant I couldn't put any details, directly in the center, and I kind of had to improvise. I just rewatched some of that footage and I realized all of the banners are messed up. So we're going to do the rest of the tour on the bakery competition server where I built this. Here's the area that's supposed to kind of send power out to the power lines up above. Again, not super technical function, just a lot of things that look like they could function. Hence all the redstone wires and banners and pillager banners and it's surprisingly useful, this pillager banner, because it's got a nice little border to it as well, and the eyeballs, when blocked out like this, look kind of like tiny little gauges with little blue needles or blue numbering or something. I mean, you have to apply your imagination a little bit, but That's the impression I get. Also, I think they kind of look like fuses or circuit breakers when you line them up with the whole front exposed in context here. Alright, final thoughts on the interior. I used the same sort of lighting tricks that I used in my library slash community center, where I blocked holes in the roof and then put translucent blocks underneath them to make it look like the windows themselves were letting light through. And so that's what I did here with the scaffolding. There's some glass and some trapdoors on the roof. And I also did the same sort of thing in here. Things got a little bit more complicated when I had this double layer corridor here. So what I ended up doing is actually doing two separate sets of translucent blocks. So you can see I've got carpet over top of walls here, which is translucent on this layer. And then above, on the same set of blocks, I have the same scaffolding technique to let light all the way in from the top down to the bottom. And here's what that stuff looks like from the outside. It blends somewhat seamlessly, depends on the layer. Here I was able to get away with trapdoors, but here it didn't line up with the roof, so I just used copper grates instead. Okay, final thoughts. I know I'm dragging this one out quite a lot. Here are some transformers I made. I actually used references for them, and I've connected them to the power lines with redstone shenanigans. This took a while to get right, actually, and I want to thank Toddpug and X90 for suggesting rails for the power lines. I was trying a bunch of stuff, and it just was not working out, but rails seems to do the trick. I think in part because they are so thin here, but they're so wide here, so they give lots of depth without giving too much mass. Lastly, I want to bring you up the stairs here to the actual top of the dam, where I've got this little wheel that is supposed to look like it opens and shuts, you know, the gates to let water into the power plant itself. And both of these rooms are identical. There's not really too much else to discuss regarding them. I suppose you could look at the terrain too. I used some pink to kind of give color. That's another thing I struggled with this build, was to give it enough color. But other than that, that's pretty much it. If you know how hydroelectric power plants work, and or you work at one and you want to yell at me for being inaccurate in the comments section, please do. As for placement, say it with me now, I once again did not make it into the top 10, and thus I didn't make it into the bakery finals comp either. Bummer. It's easy to be bitter about losing so thoroughly, especially when you feel like you deserved more after trying so hard. And I tried really hard, but that's the risk you sign up for when you enter a competition with winners and losers. The risk that you'll lose, else it wouldn't be much of a competition. I can only complain so much when a competition works as intended. Besides, look at all the stuff I made. And at the end of the day, that's what sticks with me the most. I really enjoyed all of the competition shenanigans this year. I enjoyed cheering on my competitors and friends. I enjoyed seeing results. I enjoyed seeing what other people did, as well as doing my own thing. And I hope you enjoyed watching me talk about it all. Alright, that's it from me. Bye.